Have you ever asked yourself why this Soviet sniper became so infamous? Well, this DMR was something truly unique when it first appeared during the Vietnam War, and you've probably seen it in every mainstream media like Rambo 3 and Black Ops 1. However, what most people forget to mention about it was the horrifying impact it had on modern warfare. So some of what you're gonna hear over the next 10 minutes, you won't forget easily. Alright, so the SVD story only began because the Soviets had a desperate fear of a British and Belgian rifle. At the time, the Soviets had no direct competitor to the British L1A1 self-loading rifle and Belgian FAL, who were two of NATO's best battle rifles capable of dropping a Russian soldier clean from 800 meters out. And at that range, the standard AK-47 simply got brutally outcompeted. So in any open ground fight, NATO troops could simply sit back and tap fire at Soviet infantry from positions the AK-47 could not even touch. So Moscow demanded a fix, and they wanted it carried by every motorized infantry squad as standard kit instead of only with specialized sniper units. And soon, 3 groups of designers would fight it out from 1958 to 1963, and a sport rifle engineer named Yevgeny Dragunov beat them all with a design pulled from the Olympic biathlon target rifles he had already built for the Soviets. His winning weapon was adopted on July 3rd, 1963 as the SVD, chambered in the older 7.62 by 54mm cartridge the Russians had used since Tsarist days, and each platoon was handed one of these, paired with a 4-power PSO-1 scope, finally ready to plug the gap NATO had been exploiting for over a decade. But this rifle would not see real combat for almost 10 years, and when it finally did, it terrified American intelligence so badly they allegedly put a bounty on a single one. The first SVDs started trickling into the People's Army of Vietnam around 1972. US intelligence reportedly placed a $25,000 reward on any rifle captured intact, which in today's money is well over $200,000 for a single weapon, and the PSO, one scope alone, was worth studying, with a built-in rangefinder that worked off the average human silhouette out to 1,000 meters. You see, American snipers in the jungle were stuck with delicate bolt-action snipers like the Winchester Model 70 and the Remington M40 that constantly had issues in the tropical humidity. Some Marines were even so unhappy with their issued gear that they wrote home and asked their families to ship their personal hunting rifles out to Vietnam. But suddenly, NVA squads had a semi-automatic precision weapon that could empty 10 rounds in a few seconds out to 800 meters and shrugged off the jungle. A former Spetsnaz sniper named Marko Vorobiev put it best, saying American sniper rifles were accurate but fragile, while the SVD kept working despite the weather. These NVA marksmen used the rifle exactly the way Soviet doctrine intended, picking off radio operators, officers, and squad machine gunners first to gut a US patrol's ability to call for help. By the time the war ended, the Chinese had captured a few SVDs from Vietnamese hands, reverse engineered them, and started producing their own copies as the Type 79 and Type 85. By December 1979, the Soviet 40th Army rolled into Afghanistan, and the SVD finally got the kind of war it had been built for, except it almost did not show up. You see, in 1980, most units crossed the border with very few SVDs in their armories, and a lot of marksmen had to make do with old Mosin-Nagant sniper rifles dating back to the Second World War. But by 1982, the supply finally caught up, and almost every battle group leaving on a mission would take at least one SVD shooter along them. Up in those mountains, the rifle came alive in a way it never had in the jungles of Vietnam. The standard AK-74 was effective to maybe 200 or 300 meters in real combat, while the SVD with its PSO-1 scope could comfortably double that range from a rocky overlook. So Mujahideen ambushers would open up from a ridgeline, and Soviet marksmen would answer with single shots that traveled across whole valleys before the rebels realized they had even been spotted. But the real horror started happening once the sun went down behind those peaks. Spetsnaz teams began bolting NSPU and PGN-1 night vision scopes onto their SVDs. Now these were only first generation tubes, but in the bare rocky terrain of Afghanistan, they worked well enough to engage targets out to 400 or 500 meters in complete blackout. Mujahideen, fighters who genuinely believed the dark was their refuge, were getting shot from positions they could not even see. One of the most brutal examples of the SVD in defensive use happened on January 7, 1988 at Hill 3234, where 39 Soviet paratroopers from the 9th Company of the 345th Guards held a mountain peak against waves of Mujahideen attacks for over 12 hours. Their SVDs and PKM machine guns picked off climbers in the moonlight before they could reach the rocks, and by the end of the fight, only 6 Soviets were dead, while Mujahideen losses passed 200. Believe it or not, the Mujahideen themselves almost never got their hands on an SVD. There is no real evidence that clones came down the CIA pipeline to them, and grabbing one as a trophy meant wiping out an entire Soviet unit first, which rarely happened in 9 years of war. After Yugoslavia tore itself apart in the 1990s, the SVD stopped being a tool of disciplined armies and turned into something much worse. The old Yugoslav People's Army had warehouses full of these rifles, and once the country fractured along ethnic lines, Bosnian Serb forces inherited most of those stockpiles overnight, and the longest siege of any city in modern European history was about to begin. For nearly 4 years, from April 1992 to February 1996, Serb gunmen sat on the hills around Sarajevo and shot at anything that moved on the streets below with howitzers and small arms. About 11,000 people were killed inside the city during the siege, including roughly 1,500 children, and one street alone, Dragunov Bosnia Boulevard, was so deadly it earned the name Sniper Alley after wounding 1,030 civilians and killing 225 by 1995. The warning signs read Pazi Sniper, meaning watch out sniper, and they went up on nearly every street corner. These Serb marksmen were operating from fixed positions on Trebovich Mountain, where spotters had perfect overwatch on the entire valley below. Forensic teams from the International Criminal Tribunal eventually confirmed exactly which weapon was doing most of the damage. Investigators pulled bullets out of bodies at Sarajevo's Koševo hospital, and the rounds were identified as 7.62 by 54mm R, the exact cartridge fired only by SVD-type rifles. And then the story took a turn so sick that it is still being investigated to this day. In November 2025, Italian prosecutors in Milan opened a case that even hardened journalists struggled to write about. After the legal complaint was filed, it came out that wealthy foreign tourists, mainly Italians, allegedly paid up to 100,000 euros per weekend to fly through Belgrade and shoot at Sarajevo civilians from those Serb hilltop positions. There was reportedly a price list where children cost the most, then men, then women, while the elderly could be shot for free, however sick this sounds. But we humans are quite a strange species. The investigation is still ongoing right now in 2026. By the time US troops entered Syria, they were staring down the wrong end of the same Soviet rifle they had once feared. After Syria fell apart in 2011, the SVD's story turned into something almost beyond belief. The Syrian Arab army was sitting on enormous Soviet-era stockpiles, and SVDs were standard issue for their designated marksmen from day one of the civil war. But within months, those exact same rifles started showing up in the hands of Free Syrian Army rebels, then ISIS, then al-Nusra, then Kurdish YPG fighters. Each faction in the war was carrying the same Soviet rifle, often pulled from the same captured warehouse, and used to shoot men who had been in their unit only weeks earlier. In Aleppo, sometimes called the Stalingrad of Syria, there was an infamous crossing point called Bustan al-Qasr, where civilians had to walk across an open road between government and rebel-held neighborhoods just to fetch bread or visit family on the other side. SVD shooters from both factions took turns picking people off as they crossed, and human rights groups later documented dozens of children among the dead by 2014. Opposing snipers were operating only 50 meters apart, hiding inside apartment buildings on opposite sides of the same street. One Free Syrian Army marksman, interviewed by Time magazine in 2012, had punched a fist-sized hole through his apartment wall and would sit motionless for hours, peering through his Dragunov scope, careful never to let the barrel poke out and give away his position. But the most terrifying use of the SVD in Syria came from somewhere nobody on the battlefield expected. In northeastern Syria, an all-female Kurdish militia called the YPJ started using the rifle against ISIS positions, and the effect was devastating in a way no commander could have planned for. These ISIS fighters genuinely believed that being killed by a woman would block them from paradise, so the YPJ snipers caused a panic in their ranks that pure firepower could never have created, and any Kurdish woman captured was reportedly tortured and executed in ways too graphic to describe here. But these women kept volunteering for the role anyway, because every confirmed kill pushed ISIS one step further from their towns and families. At the Battle of Kobani in 2014 and 2015, YPJ snipers played a central role in eventually pushing ISIS back out of the city entirely. By 2015, Russia was openly using Syria as a testing ground for new weapons, including modernized SVD variants like the SVDM with a free-floating barrel. That same modernized line is what Kalashnikov concern is now mass-producing in 2026 for the war in Ukraine, with output of the folding stock SVDs up roughly 13 times over the previous year's numbers, a 63-year-old design that nobody, not the Americans, not the Chinese, not even the Russians themselves, has ever managed to fully replace.